So hello everybody.
Hello.
As the new intern on Simple, we're going to work on the art direction of the game, trying to explore some idea and concept of metaverse. The first week, we started our research on the MetaQuest store, trying to get into some entertainment games to take stock of the current situation. So the so-called educational game are included in a category named education experiences on the MetaQuest store. So many of the games, which are also the most highlighted, are added for tourist attraction. Virtual reality is often used to offer an experience of discovery. So the possibility of taking a tour through time with 3D reconstitution of vanished monuments, or on 360-degree video of tourist sites. So like on the PowerPoint, some examples of education experiences. There is another category which stays contemplative. The model is way similar to the first. The model is way similar to the first, but the immersion is in an environment such as a forest or savanna. At first glance, educational games are mainly about visiting inaccessible places like vanished monuments, etc. And direction is less important than information content, and we got the impression that many games struggle to justify the using of virtual reality. Games are interesting in a museum context, but remain in the same way as wall projection, film shown on screen, or interactive touchscreen tablets that you can see on various museums. In a museum context, where visitors are often attracted by interactivity, animated images, and so on, games are Games are an ideal solution to have a pedagogical interactivity. In fact, the word game is not used to describe this kind of game. The educational section on the MetaQuest store is called education experiences. The word experience specifying the objective of certain programs where interactivity is reduced and content limited. So like this game. The great advantage of virtual reality is that it breaks away from conventional learning, and it's kind of attractive for people. Take an example. So it's the National Geographic Explore Virtual Reality. Is an interesting example of a game because it is at the crossroads of the two models mentioned above. So discover environment and discover some vanished monuments. And it offers interactivity that makes sense in a museum and in a living room. From a first-person perspective, you play as an adventurer exploring and photographing two geographical sites. So Maya, the Maya Machu Picchu, Maya, the place, and the game's graphic style was not discussed on this point, but it's important to point out that most of the game feature realistic views, often with photographs, and the elements which can move are in 3 dimensions. In a 3-dimensional representation, and is faithful to a naturalistic reality to keep it realistic as much as possible. So as you can see on the PowerPoint. Another example, it's the game Viral. Is in the same way, Viral is a significant example of a good blending of fun and education. It is developed by INSERM, the French National Institute for Health and Medical Research. It's for help players understand. So in the wake of COVID epidemic, etc., how disease develop and attack the human organism. So exploring blood vessels in virtual reality, working your way through mucus in search of an infectious site, detecting and treating the disease that is eating away at the patient, and finally bringing back a sample to enable the manufacture of a large-scale treatment that will save making from facing a new pandemic. This is the incredible adventure that INSERM is offering you with the VR games. So it's the description by INSERM. VR is presented as a game and not educational experiences, but we are moving away from what a serious game should be and a serious game should be, and focusing on a gameplay experience with an educational purpose. It's an immersive experience with the codes of today's video game. There is a storyline within the adventure, accompanied by a carefully crafted interface that combines educational content with gameplay information. The artistic direction of the game takes in a detailed human body with an interpreted but realistic view that enhances the immersion. Viewers' aim is to focus on the gameplay and conveying educational content through these game experiences, using several of the tools offered by virtual reality to propose different gameplay mechanics, going beyond the simple gadget, because as I said before, in most cases of virtual reality experiences, our game seems to be here to make like a good impression of modernity, like the game like this. But we think that here there is a real impact, a real pedagogical impact.
Yeah. So now we will get into some interest of the VR games. So first, we're going to talk about the scale ratios. So the immersive format introduced by the VR games make possible to glimpse into new scales of time and space within virtual worlds. And some educational experiences take this as an advantage. And for example, Titans of Space, here, it's called the Space Giant here, immerses its user in a ship exploring the solar system and providing a new perspective on the scale relationships. And in this way, the experience marks on the player and is more likely to provide educational content. Here is an other interesting example. It's called the sea level rise, and here the player can interact with the time scales. So in this game, the user is confronted with a location sensitive to rising water levels, and the player can test the impact of the level water rise, and this way it gives the player a sense of responsibility, and because the world he controls is real and based on a real location. And this empowerment of the player is an axis that can reinforce learning. The player is free to act as he wishes in the VR experiences, but it's up to him to learn outside what he has seen, what he is seen in the experience. We can see in the non-educational games, there is a playful use of time and space scales. So we can see with the city builder genre, it's a type of game where the player builds cities. We have a new perspective on the city builder genre, because the player can visit the city through an immersive view. So in the Little Cities VR, we can go really close to the buildings or have the view of a bird. And it's not shown here, but in another city builder game called Cities VR, the player can modify the time scales. So it can be interesting because the player can accelerate the time and see how the the experience will react with it. And finally, in the game Per Aspera, we have a more global view of the planet here. And, so we can explore with the VR some different space scales, and that's what the media can be interesting. And now I'm going to talk about the technical constraints of VR because it's really important, and it's in link with the art direction. So first we have to know that standalone headsets are really limited in resources, and for example, the MetaQuest 2 comes with a rendering capacity for that looks like a Nintendo Switch, but the main problem is MetaQuest 2 has to render in HD, so 180p, and the VR needs 72 frames per second to work well. So this performance constraints of the MetaQuest 2 impact the in-game rendering and so the artistic direction. So the main constraints is the lack of dynamic lighting due to resource-intensive real-time shadow calculation. And for that, we need to use alternatives. For example, we can use light maps. So the light is baked into the textures. And we cannot afford dynamic lights, so lights won't be able to move. And also, we cannot, or it needs to be really reduced, use what we call a PBR rendering. So it's a physical-based rendering. It's it's the technology to render realistic textures. So we need to avoid that because it's really costly. And there is also a bit of polygon limitations. For example, on the MetaQuest 2, it's around 1 million polygons. So we can develop huge environments because it will cost too much in polygons. So we need to consider these limitations really early in the game production because we need to adapt to this. Otherwise, we won't be able to render at 72 frames per second. And so here I've shown some realistic art direction and way it's a big risk because when you go into realistic art direction, you have a lot of trouble making a good-looking face. For example, in working at height here, the face looks a bit dull, and it's what we call uncanny valley. The face looks weird because it's not realistic enough. So, and it's the same in Battle Talent there. And also, for example, in working at height, we have on the right image some dynamic objects, so objects that the player can interact with. And these don't have static shadows, so it breaks the immersion because it's not realistic enough. So we need to be really careful if we want to do something that looks realistic, because it can quickly look like the game on top. Therefore, it's crucial to consider artistic direction while being mindful of VR constraints. many VR games share graphical choices out of necessity, and yet these technical limitations don't hinder the creation of diverse and original visual worlds. So, like I've said, often games like dynamic shadows with lighting managed through static objects like maps, and the absence of dynamic lighting is managed differently in VR experiences. And yeah, for example, in working at height, the game focuses on the gameplay and not really on the art. So yeah, it's not looking that great. On the other hand, there is some stylized art direction, and for example, we have some example of two educational VR experiences that cleverly manage these constraints. For example, we have Lost Recipes on top. It's a game where you have to cook ancient recipes with ancient tools. And in this game, there is a really stylized art direction with what we call cel shading. So there is only there is a strict difference between light and shadow. And with that art direction, we can go further into the details of the texture because we won't have to render realistic light.
For a second example, there is a game, Nuntan language learning. In Nuntan, each of the interaction is linked to language learning. So with each object, dialogue, and activity teaching us new words and formulations. Nuntan makes a clear-cut choice in the artistic direction. The game dispenses with texture, composing only in a flat color and gradient. This graphic choice conceals a technical trick. All the objects in the world are managed by a single texture, containing the colors and gradients. Thanks to this, the game drastically reduces the number of draw calls and saves a great deal of computing power. Thanks to this, the game artistic direction is consistent with a colorful and cartoonish world that's attractive to return and therefore conducive to learning the language, etc. Attractiveness seems to be a component of educational game that is often difficult to achieve. It's hardest, we think it's hardest when learning takes place beyond the single experience. The experience may be beneficial and attractive once, but when the learning is long-term, like in Nuntan, it's a challenge. So Nuntan aims to keep the user as a recurring player, which is not a common objective for educational games. And its relevance is because educational content deserves long-term learning. The experience may be single-use, but when games have a cost and are used outside museums or a learning environment, it's disappointing a bit. And another interesting point is the treatment of the character. So we talk about art direction. They are highly stylized, drawing on the cartoon and manga codes. The shapes are simplified, soft, and rounded, and the character expressions and interactions are caricated and amusing. Characters can be anthropomorphic, and we don't have an example, but there is anthropomorphic characters. We anthropomorphic character, animal, and plants. So it's adding an extra dimension of fantasy, etc. The game's overall graphics seems to be in line with current Japanese fashion, which most young people under the age of 20 seems to adhere to. So I think interesting. And the only limitation would be that people who are not attracted by this style which may be culturally seen as infantilizing, will not be interested in the game, whereas it offers interactive educational learning with a very great relevance. And secondly, non-turn character style is much simpler to produce than the fully rigged and animated face-off games, so like this one, which tend toward a more realistic rendering, and this makes for faster, more efficient production, and by extension for enriching character content to populate a real virtual reality universe.
Now I will quickly talk about art direction in non-instructional VR games. So first, I would like to talk about the fact that in professional VR experiences, we have the need to have a realist art direction, because it's in the case of formation. So here, in this example, the art direction tends to be realistic, but we can see that, for example, characters don't have a shadow, and some of the environments are just photos. So in this example, it's logic, but we can see that in the non-pedagogical experiences, we can push further the art direction. So we search for some different examples. So for example, on top in Garden of the Sea, the game aims to offer relaxing and playful experiences. And in terms of art direction, we find the same solution as Noontown mentioned before. So it's flat colors, stylized and simplified visuals, and cel-shaded light. Still, the game gives a bit more information in the textures, but at the cost of no dynamic shadows. So we don't really have a lot of dynamic shadows in the Garden of the Sea. There is other example in Fuji. Once again, there is a lack of dynamic lighting, but the game offers richly colored pictures and with a strong artistic direction, so we forget that the game doesn't have shadows. And it's also possible because the worlds in Fuji are really strictly limited, so we can go further into the textures and the polygon count. And we have some other examples. For example, in Luna, the game tries a more stylized and traditional painted art style. So this kind of art direction is possible, but it's really costly because we have to load a lot of textures. So in Luna, it's possible because it's, again, really small worlds. And for example, there is some games like Stranger Things that tries other art directions. In here, it's inspired by the comic books, and I think this example is really amazing. But we have to know that it's made by a big company, so they have a lot of money, and they have a lot of people to optimize the resources in the games. We have to keep in mind that every choices is also made by the money we have. And slide.
So we choose some example of there is virtual reality games and just games. So we have few examples, but that will inspiring us for simple. So Noontown, Viral, and Garden of the Sea that we already talked. But for example, here there is Dordogne. It's a new game. It's a new French game made in watercolor. It's an original artistic direction, and so all backgrounds are created using watercolors. It's a transcription of traditional media into a virtual reality universe, and it could be interesting and original. This may present technical difficulties because the method involves loading a large numbers of texture into the scene, which limits the size of the universe that can be developed. It's like there is a wall. But it's very interesting. Here there is Baba Yaga. It's not a game, but a virtual reality movie. And is Disney-inspired art direction, extensive sets and character work, precise lighting. This helped by the fact that it's a virtual reality film with lights decided in advance and calculated in the set. Made possible by the fact that the players' movements are defined in advance, so it's more easy. So here there is Ghost Giants. It's a game of...
It was a game for PS4 VR, but there is an adaptation of the MetaQuest store.
Yeah, so that's a game that modifies spatial scales and offers interesting interactivity for the players, up to date, art direction, light, and shade.
But once again, it's a game. The two on the bottom are games with a big budget, and we have to find the right balance between really great art direction and an art direction that can be quickly done, because we won't have a lot of resources in Simple. And us as artists, we would like to explore things like Dordogne, where to propose new ways of building a virtual world. To conclude.
So to conclude, the computing power of standalone headsets represents one of the biggest problems to be solved. To address this problem, it's important to define the nature of the project in advance. So how big will the environment be? Is it a multiplayer game? What is the player point of view? This pre-production of the game then defines the game's graphic requirements, and this gives a precise view of the possibilities in terms of an artistic direction. Secondly, this research has opened up the possibility of using virtual reality for edutainment experiences and serious game. Several aspects seems important. The use of virtual reality's interactivity tools can be interesting for transmitting educational content, and it seems important to use them to exploit the full potential of virtual reality experiences. Virtual reality can also offer the player the possibility of interacting with the scales of time and space. We think it's necessary to define if the experience is for a single use, or if you want to make people play again and again. And to go further, we will need to specify the needs of the simple project to see the possibilities in terms of artistic direction. It would also be interesting to ask the Vietnamese students about the graphic universe to which they are sensitive in order to direct our work after. So that's all about the project, and we have a little presentation of our works.
Yeah. So, I'm Eloi Landes. So I did a master degree in artistic direction for video games. So here is some of my work. I'm mainly focused on 3D and 3D environments. And this year I've done a master degree project that is here. I don't know if it will load. And the goal was to make a little game about birds of the seashore in France, and to inform about different birds that exist in the French coast. Yeah. So this is a little trailer. I will just show the gameplay. Yeah. So we are on a little island, and our goal is to place some bird houses to gain more points, and to rebuild an ecosystem on a small island. Yeah.
Ouais, sûrement dans la veine.
Yeah.
Comment on met un...
Je sais pas. Ah oui, carrément.
Moi, je sais pas faire.
Si, au passage, je peux faire un.
So me, I'm Pierre Chandezon. It's my master degree is validation internship, and my master is so not video game but about illustration and multimedia. And I also completed this year inter-university degree in anthropology. I specialize in children book, big books, but I also in animating film set and background, and I'm glad to work with you on sample, because I wish I could link my work with scientists in my professional life. And this year I work, okay, there I missed something, but I work on a child book about a snake that's traveled around the world. So this is the first page, but there is 20 other pages, but it's difficult to show on the screen a book. But I like working on sustainable development and ecology, and while taking account of some cultural factors. It's something that I'm trying to include in my work, and so it's very great. But if you want, I can show you my book in a PDF, and I can send you. I already sent to Leo. So I think that's all.
Yeah, that's all for us.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys.
So now maybe we're going to answer questions if anybody got. Maybe we can start with Zoom questions. If someone on Zoom wants to say something. No? Okay, if there are no questions on Zoom, then in the room, I guess there are many.
Yeah.
How does the model
it's made on Unity, and it's a PC game for now, but I have some ideas to put it on tablets. It would be interesting. Yeah, our school teaches to make the artistic direction and artistic everything that comes like a 3D and everything, but I did all the code by myself. So it doesn't work very well sometimes, but on the overall it works.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so thank you very much. You mostly show the single user games. So
yeah.
universes, etc. So what about multi-user?
So we mainly what we found about multiplayer was either it was about chatting rooms. It was also we found some poker games, and we didn't find some multiplayer educational experiences, but it would be interesting to develop that. The thing that we've seen is that multiplayer games takes also a lot of computing resources, and so we also have to think about that really soon because it will impact the artistic direction.
I used to work on and we know that it is oriented or content or on the users or on the collaborative aspect. So my question was, how do you take into account when you are thinking about, for instance, design? How do you take into consideration these dimensions?
Yeah, we have to take everything in consideration when it comes to artistic direction. For example, on my project, I was aiming for like 10 years old people, yeah. And with that in mind, you have to think about your interface, how your gameplay, and every artistic choice is made with the public in mind. And I think it's the same for Pierre and his book.
Yeah, my question is more about do you check and look at theoretical pedagogy and all the characteristics of specific pedagogy to include them in the way you are thinking standardization? It's very many questions.
I think it would be important to do that, but in my game I didn't because I wasn't focusing on that. But I think it's important to look about the different ways we can bring pedagogical content.
Yes. Sorry, I'm coming back to the multi-user things because it's one of the probably one of the directions we are going to take in school. So enable 5 to 10 children to be together in the same environment, and knowing that most of the computation is done within the headsets, by the headsets. I don't understand what would be the added costs, computation costs of having having one user or multiple users in the same environment.
In terms of graphical computing, because it's what I know, it brings a lot of animated characters, and that costs a lot because we have to make a character that have a rig, so a skeleton in it, and we have to load every animations of other players in the same environment, and that can take a lot of resources. And I think it's one of the main graphical issue. And after that, in purely computer power, I don't know everything. It's not my specialization, but yeah, in terms of graphical, animated characters cost really a lot.
Other questions? It's more difficult because you have to synchronize.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for the technical part, but issue because if you have a lag, you see what other players.
So I recall there is probably some extra computation. You're not alone, so you have interactions, you have a number of things which are allowed or not allowed. was really wondering in terms, so you basically gave a hint to the answer, but in terms really of computational power. So if I have a game, single user game, actually, what will be the added computational costs to make it multi-user? For me, it's something we need to consider at some point, because if it is something linear with a number of players, it is manageable.
Yeah.
Like actually, probably in 4 years, we will have headsets which will be 10 times more powerful than today. Okay, so it's completely manageable. But if it is if the complexity grows to 4 or 3-4 players or square, then maybe we need to rethink what we want to do.
Something that will be a bit different from our case, it's because we will have a server with Gamma running simulation, and this I think it's a bit different because not for the display part, but
Yes, as long as you do it there, it's always okay.
yeah. But maybe I don't know if we have more. It's the server, the power of if you have a server that's the power of because for the player, you can have 5 except if you can see all of them.
Check exactly, but anyway, as long as one of the costs anyway, if we do multiplayer or not multiplayer, it's gonna be only the rendering processing parts. And if one cost of multiplayer is that player characters have very heavy character, 3D model, plenty of polygons and everything. And that's the cost of having it. We're gonna be able to do some optimization, but at some point we're gonna be limited. As the more we're gonna have player character, the more we're gonna have polygons, and at some point we have
one polygons for each player.
Yeah, we can texture, we can have dots. But one easy way to optimize it is to use low characters, and so we're gonna have low rendering and low interaction with them. Points that we have to see, but yeah.
Are there techniques which allows for degraded when the network where there is some lagging, etc. So you only compute degraded images or polygons or whatever, and then whenever you have the possibility or the power, you come back to normal computations. Are there techniques like this?
It makes me think of one technique we use. It's what we call LODs. It's a level of details. And so to make that, we have to, each 3D object you make, you have to make at least three versions of it, which will be loaded when you are close with your camera, the EV poly object is loaded, but when we are far away. Yeah. But there is a lot of techniques. I don't know if they're linked to the, it won't change anything about connection problems. So
actually, I ask a question because in simple, I hope we will get rid of one main problem, which is the lag networks.
Yeah.
Because we have a local central server, probably local Wi-Fi 6 or 7 or 8 communication. So very high bandwidth. And normally that shouldn't be too many interferences. We're not too done. So we could probably get rid of it. The extra costs be more in terms of multiple users, multiple rendering, renditions, what is happening. So,
yeah, but we have to take in mind that the computation of the game and gamma and the link with gamma will be, I think, calculated on the CPU, while everything that comes with 3D and textures is only GPU normally. So I think we have to test things a lot to see what works and what not.
Process of having final fidelity was well, I experienced working for previous projects. What are the steps from the kind of conceptualization to the final service and effectiveness? Which part of this will be your work? So that's the first question. And the second one is during all the implementation of the work, how to ease your work and what are the constraints that may happen to you? Like at what point would be there's really no point of return for your work. Once you did that, I mean, there's no way to have it back, for instance.
Okay. I mean, what I know is about video games. So the steps as an artist, there is a team that there is basically 3 teams. So the code, so tech people that make the code and make the things work. There is design people, so it's people that made the rules of your game. So there is people that do that. So think a map, think about the interactions, etc. And there is the artist people, so us. We have plenty of steps, but we begin with what we call pre-production. So in pre-production, we do what we call a concept art. So we have an idea and we make images out of it. We have an idea of what the game will look like. And then we build the world with can call proxies. So it's temporary stuff that will be changed along the way. So in this step is important because it's where you make a lot of decisions in terms of design. And then we can go into production where me as a 3D artist, I will build the environment, make the assets, make the textures, make the characters. When you are into productions, you want to have no changes in the design. So I think when your design is finished, it's a bit of a point of no return, because after that you will build a world. It takes a lot of time, and if you have to change the design, so you have to cut a lot of work you did. But it happens oftenly in a game production, and it's a big problem because you have to think about all the problems before the production begins, because after that you will be work that you can cut and you can lose a lot of time. Yeah.
How long else usually take you to finish your work? Characters.
It depends a lot on the project. Yeah, it depends. To do
The shortest and the longest time that you have.
yeah, on a VR games, I think if we have to do some character design, we can do it in like 2 weeks, maybe. It depends on the number of characters you have to do. Same for the concept art, so we can take if it's complicated or if it's I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
It's hard to say, but
And we are two.
yeah, we are two.
We don't already work in the real industry, so we don't know. It's like a school project. So I'm not into video games or and it's the same in animation, but it's difficult to say.
But
but basically what you say is that there
with the possibility, the responsibility. It's quite usual. Completely separate the tech design from the artistic.
Not really. We have to work with these people. We have to think the art direction with the design in the code, mainly the design. But usually, yeah, the artistic direction is a separate task. Because with the same design, you can go into different directions that works. But it depends really on the size of the team. For example, in huge project games, there is a dedicated art team that works with the designer, but works they work pretty alone, I think. But in a small team, I think we have to talk more and do multiple tasks.
Yeah, because one of the things we have to consider at one point, you mentioned it, I think it's Pierre mentioned it, that the artistic direction, so we have to be creative and propose things, and test things, but we also have to take into account local cultures.
Yeah.
Not only trends like manga or Korean style animes and others, also well, cultures. So how do you represent scene? How do you represent animals? What is the value of its elements in the environment? And so that's, I think it is quite, well, actually, what I feel is that if we are able to separate artistic direction from design and tech, then it would allow for much more flexible discussion and dialogue with children, with teachers, with anyone concerned actually, graphical design.
Yeah, but I think game design is, interaction is also a thing to work with the public, because we need to do experiences that is in link with their culture too. I think design is also a thing also a bit of a cultural thing. And I don't know if we play games the same way here. That I don't know.
Well, there is for me, the graphical representation will have strong interactions with culture.
Yeah.
How we represent things. Gameplay is probably a little bit different because first there will be a kind of worldwide. The game does not. When Sony or whatever releases the game, it doesn't only release it in Japan or in Europe, and there are probably very few differences. But in terms of interaction, okay. So I guess we will need at some point to really separate things. And for me, I'm interested, but probably not the answer right now. But for me, I'm interested to understand when we need to separate. When we can safely say, okay, the design is one thing, tech is another thing, people working on roles, etc. And we have a small team of artistic developers or artists working on the graphical design. I wonder if you have ideas or experiences on when it is safe to do it. How do we know that it is safe to do it? That we will not put everything in the trash. But maybe you don't have experience.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But think about the link with culture, etc. It's not wasted time. So we made some concept and they're not used at the end. I think it's not so bad because it helped to develop the game, even if the concept is sometimes useless and they're not useless, I think.
Yeah. When it comes to the concept art stage, there is the goal is to produce a lot of things and to see what works and what does not work. And if something isn't used, we know why we didn't use it because it wasn't the good choices. So at the beginning,
it's time of test and experimentation,
we need to do a lot of
trying things to show at the people like Vietnamese students, etc.
And then we can make a choice based on what works and the cultural the culture here. And then we can go into production and think about how to transcript these concepts into the game.
Okay. A lot of fun.
Okay, I think we're good. It's been almost 1 hour, so we can finish there. It's good for everybody. Thank you for people on Zoom. That's it. If you don't have any questions.
Maybe one last round of question, possibility to ask question for people on Zoom. So we do have a problem here. We don't see if you raise your hand, so you have to unmute yourself and just ask the question. Sorry about that. But if you stay silent for, okay, go ahead.
Excuse me, so I found some difficulties with hearing people from the microphone, but I think we can get some idea for now. Can I still ask one more question?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so based on your discussion, so I am from NASDA, Thailand, and I have one question about how to work together. Because the time frame, the interns will be with us only 6 months, right? But for now, we haven't got the final idea how to create the game. Right? There are still many questions about how the right direction to create the game. And for now, we have our art team with us, and also we have intern that gonna plan to help us as well. So how we are going to work together during this time frame? So what do we need to prepare? Something like that.
I think we mainly need to prepare what the world will be.
Yeah. But if I may answer, so this is Alexis. If I may answer, so first, I think that we probably have some answers about this when we establish a common timeline during the kickoff meeting. And in this timeline, we will make sure that we have sufficient exchanges. So we're meaning also physical exchanges. So people going there, people visiting you, some of your interns maybe visiting the lab in Hanoi. So we have to make sure that we have the sufficient exchanges like this. After, I think that one of the main issues we will have, of course, is to maintain something coherent among the different projects, because there won't be only one project, but different ones. And for me, that's why I was asking the question about when can we begin to really separate the tasks. And I think that the most urgent and the most important would be really to determine the message you want to pass on with your game, determine the contents and the context of this message. Okay, so what are we going to use as a kind of case study, or what kind of scenarios are we going to consider? What kind of interactions are we going to allow for children? And then from there we can move on, I think, beginning to think about artistic directions, about what kind of representation we want to have, what kind of freedom we want to have in terms of scenarios or whatever. So there is it corresponds, if you have them, actually it corresponds to the set of slides, the template we shared with you regarding how we presenting what you have thought about and what
Mhm.
you are beginning to work on. Okay, so I think we can't have an answer today. Today it was more a kind of overview of what was existing and things we can consider. Okay,
I see.
but in any case, it's not, of course, what we are going to do. Okay, well, that's been presented here. It's really an example and of the constraints also that exists in the industry regarding the production of VR games.
I see. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think that sums it up. So thank you again, guys. And